Starfield is releasing this week. I cannot believe I'm saying that.
Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
But this video is all of my pre-launch Starfield breakdowns of the Direct and any information that was released packed together in one video for all of your hype and viewing pleasure. Let's go. Let me know in the comments what you're most excited to check out in Starfield, but without further ado, let's get into it. Whew. Okay, there is so much in this Direct, and it's literally impossible to break down the whole thing. So we're just going to go through these 20 different details. I'm going to jump around a fair bit to different parts in the Direct, that sort of thing. So stick with me. Chapters and everything are here, but let's get into it. We're going to start with some planet things. And firstly, this biomes on planets and if there is multiple biomes per planet. So we see pretty early on that surveying will bring up things like fauna and flora and resources that can be scanned. And there's a scan percentage per planet. Very like a la similar to, No Man's Sky. You scan all the different creatures and things that you see on the planets. Now, it's also seen later in the surveys that there is a current biome section in some scans that can be, say, 0% or X amount of percent, depending on what they've scanned. And you can also see that certain creatures live in different biomes. So once you've scanned those creatures and learned more about them, you can see their temperaments as well as what resource they give, as well as the livable biomes that they do have. So whether there is different biomes on planets or not, we don't 100% no, but it does seem like it would be. And some planets, especially in some of those shots, you can see have different areas on them. So it does sort of make sense that if you can land anywhere on the planet, if you're landing on one side of the planet, it may be a different biome to the other. Speaking of those planets, there is hazards when you do land on those planets. Now, we do see in the armor system early on that you've got physical, energy, and EM, the electromagnetic rounds or types of weapons that you do have for the guns that I mentioned later on, but there is also thermal, airborne, corrosive, and radiation. And when you can zoom out and look at the different planets and scan them, you can actually see on these planets as well that they will show things like, say, water being radioactive or a cold temperature or deep freeze, which one planet does actually mention. So different planets will have different temperatures or, say, corrosive aspects or radiation or airborne diseases, things like that you may need to be aware of when you are surveying that planet and deciding to land on them. These planets also seem to have some sort of traits. Now, it is seen a lot in these scans that when you're scanning on different planets, there is like these traits that either say unknown or have a question mark. In some of these shots, specifically the Tatacha planet later on, you can actually see what these traits are. So at one point, you can see that the player has the first trait or second trait unlocked, which is the gravitational anomaly. Then a little bit later, when they've got the 100% survey, you can see they found the second trait, which is the ecological consortium. Exactly what those traits are, I have no idea. But it is interesting to see that these planets will have not only these different creatures and fauna and resources, but whatever these traits actually do for that planet. And having something like 1,000 planets, it seems like it's just another way of distinguishing something unique about that planet. And how you find those traits, whether you just have to survey something on the planet or maybe you have to go and discover something, we don't know yet, but it's just an interesting little tidbit that I did find when going through all the survey information you do have. Enemies seemingly have two different types of health bars. There is a white health bar, which when the player shoots them, it has to be removed, and some also have a red health bar. It's hard really to distinguish what red and white mean. In most games, red sort of means health, but the fact that some enemies don't even have a red health bar is a little confusing. It does seem like it depends on, say, how strong the armor is of that target, right? Because some of the red health bars have multiple chunks, some of them only have the one, and same sort of vice versa for the white. So whether it's like stamina and health or armor and health or something, it's not really clear exactly, but you can see there are different types of health bars. Ammo also has no weight. So very similar to Fallout where you would go and pick up ammo, it has no weight, so you can carry as much ammo as you do need. You can loot armor. This was an interesting thing that I noticed watching the Direct back multiple times, is that when the player is looting bodies, there isn't really armor, which is a very key thing in Bethesda games. Like you can always pick up all the armor of the target that you've defeated. Now, it seems interesting. So there are a couple of shots where the player has like exploded the enemy or used like a big weapon to kill them, and they don't have any armor drops. But later on, there are multiple shots where the player will merely kill the target and a piece of armor drops from that, whether that be a helmet or just some general armor. There's a couple of times this happens. I'm really interested to know if this is like specific in that you have to merely kill the target to get a piece of armor, because say like, if you blow them up with a ballistic weapon, it sort of makes sense that like their armor is destroyed, right? So if you merely kill them, the armor isn't destroyed, you can take it. Or if it's just like that you can't loot everyone's armor anymore in Starfield. It's just like random drops that sometimes they will drop armor. I'm not really sure either or which one I prefer. Like, I'm not overly bothered for the most part in Bethesda games, other than like the early stages. I never really do anything with the armor that the enemies drop. Like, I mostly just like sell it, you know, like I'm not hugely worried if we don't loot all the armor from enemies. It's just an interesting tidbit, I thought. Speaking of those armor pieces, you can actually hide them. So you can hide your spacesuit in settlements. So say if you're, you know, in the city, or we also see a shot of a player in street clothes when they're in like a spaceship, and you can hide your helmet in breathable areas. So say if you're in cutscenes or you want to walk around in third person, you can avoid showing off that helmet. But there is plenty of different like outfits and spacesuits and different things to wear. We see a couple of shots of that throughout the direct. Different planet systems have level requirements. So we see multiple planet systems when the player does zoom out and they travel between these systems. Like we see Porime has level 30, Volai has level 5, and Linois, I don't know how to say these words, guys, but is level 45. So it seems like planets will have specific level requirements to get to them. And it is also shown that, you know, you need specific grav drive upgrades to get to certain planets. So there does seem to be some sort of progression between where in the galaxy you can go, also from your level, and then also from how your ship can actually get to those systems, right, from its grav drive. So it's going to be interesting to see a bit more about that, and, you know, how far in like the very reaches of space, if you can go all the way out, you know, what level requirements that's going to be and what sort of upgrades you need to actually just be able to get there. This one I wanted to include, even though it's not a direct detail, but there's a clear improvement between last year's like Starfield gameplay reveal we got and the shots that are very similar in this deep dive. Like just comparing, say, entering the Constellation base and the seeing things like Barrett and the Freestar Collective space, like the Akela City area, there is clear improvements in just like the overall graphical quality, the animations, and the character models from these areas. Like, I'm blown away by what has changed in this like 1 year since the game was, you know, discussed last year compared to this year.
Hey, you're finally awake.
You can seemingly change your character appearance after the initial character creation. On the character creation screen, it does say that biometric customizations can be changed later by visiting a genetics facility. It's also mentioned that you can seemingly start your own business by picking a certain background called diplomat in the character creation. So in the settled systems free market economy, almost anyone with the right skill set can open and run a successful business. So seemingly you will be able to start your own business in these settled systems. Interestingly, this background is actually different to the one that we saw in the gameplay reveal last year as well. And other things have changed as well. Say, for example, kid stuff, which when we did see extensively in the deep dive, we did see a brief snippet of that in the gameplay reveal last year. And that monetary value that you needed to give to your parents was 10% and it's now only 2%. So seemingly these backgrounds and traits are still, or were changing between the time we saw it last year and now to either fix some of that balance or just change the way that they're sort of set up. It is interesting to see. The persuasion system is vastly different and very similar to, say, an Oblivion, where it seems like you will have different turns that you take and you say something, and that will either increase or decrease your persuasion level depending on whether that message that you've said is successful, and different conversation points will actually increase that bar more compared to others depending on, say, your background or traits. May unlock different options as well. Contraband and smuggling is both mentioned and shown in the deep dives. When you enter the UC space, there is a wait for a scan pop-up where you do have to wait for your ship to be scanned for contraband. Now, it's interesting because smuggling is directly mentioned, so theoretically you would assume that there are ways to get around this scan to smuggle something into the system, whether that is you try and escape from them or what have you, but it's just a little tidbit that I noticed. This ties back to the different planetary hazards, but there is mention in the physical skill tree of a skill called decontamination, which is to do with recovering from infection. So it slightly increases your chance to recover from infections naturally, which is interesting because if you think about the airborne planetary hazards, you know, theoretically maybe you can get infections that way, maybe it's from bad food. It's just an interesting thing to point out. Ship customization is gigantic and it's sort of its own video, but I just wanted to point out this here, that there is a brief shot of showing the different sections that you can, say, customize or upgrade, and there are 13 different sections. 13, like, that's crazy. And it seems like as well that on the ship customization screen, how we've seen things like the Optimus Prime ship and all the wild and wacky contraptions you can create, there is actually a flight check system. So you will be able to check to see if the ship will actually fly depending on the mass and the different like thrusters and stuff that you've put onto the ship in terms of, you know, its overall like engines and grav drive and boost, or if it's, you know, too heavy to actually get off the ground. Seems like you'll be able to play around with that to actually see if it works. In one of the systems, we see that the player enters a Freestar collective system that does have a bounty system. The player seems to have a bounty here. It's unclear whether this is specific to, say, the Freestar collective faction, or it's this system, or what have you, but there is a bounty shown on that screen. I really want to understand more about this, and I would love if someone would ask the developers in some interview, but planets seemingly aren't the same for everyone. So it is mentioned that even if your friends visit the same planet, you have a different story to tell, meaning things may be different for players on these planets, right? Because of the way that, say, they talk about how the planets are built as you approach them, like that procedural generation, and then they're handcrafted systems like the points of interest and creatures, etc., sort of built on top of that. So things may be different for different players, which coincidentally may mean things are different for you on different playthroughs. Like, I'm really interested to test that out for myself, or if someone asks the devs about that, like, I'd love to understand what is actually different, like what that's actually referring to when they're talking about that, because that was really, really interesting to me. There is also legendary items returning, like legendary weapons and stuff, but there is other qualities as well. So in a couple of times in the shots, we see a blue quality item which drops and it has 1 star, whereas a legendary item has 3. So theoretically, there's sort of like your epic in between that, whether it's a purple, which is the typical sort of coloring system, that we may see some like epic quality weapons or armor that is going to drop from certain enemies in the game. And lastly, this one is a big tease for something more. It's this weird force powers thing. We see the player raise their hand and then everything gets real trippy and like gravity seems to stop, or it's like slow motion or something sort of happening there. My suspicion is that this is linked to like the anomaly and the artifacts that you're looking for and to finding. There's mentions in the trailer to do a story about seeing visions from these and potential, you know, like intelligent alien life out there. I think it's linked to that sort of main story, and that's just like a big tease that is meant to entice us for more. So first, let's just sort of discuss like the big things. Now, I noticed in the direct, compared to last year's gameplay reveal, that the combat looks significantly smoother, and even on top of that, compared to their previous titles. Like, the weapons have this really sort of nice snappiness and like good recoil to them. They look like they've got a bit of weight, and enemies like react to some of the shots as well, not just like when they die. And I think one of the like most underrated things from the overall trailer in general is how much better third person just looks, like regardless whether you're in combat or not. Skyrim and Fallout 4 and all BGS games have always had the option to play in third person, but it always felt like a little bit, I don't know, like janky. Like, it never really looked good or felt good. But in the direct, it actually does look like a proper, like, valid way to play the game, which is a good thing, like, you know, to have that option. But I probably will be playing the game first person and only jump into third person to like check out my sick outfit or something. But overall, the combat looks really, really good. I like the weapon variety and how like unique a lot of the weapons and their animations look. Even just the animations of the player looks really good. But let's just break down everything that we've seen so far. So firstly, in combat, now the main thing that I mentioned in my last video that a couple of people pointed out about as well is the 2 different health bars. Now, there is a white health bar and a red health bar. To me, it seems odd, but the red health bar appears to be armor and the white health bar appears to be health. I feel like that should be the other way around, but who am I to judge? But anyway, so there you've got those 2 health bars. Now, not all enemies will have a red health bar, but all will have a white health bar seemingly for their health. In some shots as well, we also see like a blue heartbeat sort of bar that appears to be related to that neuro skill that one of the developers does mention for like melee combat. So maybe like if you drain that bar, you can like stun or like knock out the enemy. Not really clear there, as in all of the shots, they basically just like one-shot them with their melee attacks. But there is also the gravity and like the boost pack at play here, which is definitely going to play a major role in combat. And I think the gravity is like the key one, and you know, different planets having different gravity levels, and also like fighting in 0G with no gravity at all, and how ballistic weapons can like push you back, that sort of thing, plus the boost packs. That adds like a level of variety on top of the combat and a verticality, like a third dimension. So if you think about, you know, Skyrim, you're basically plastered to the ground, hacking at each other with swords, and in Fallout, you're plastered to the ground, you know, just shooting each other with guns. But now in Starfield, you've got that third dimension of the gravity elements of being able to, say, even in 0G, fighting in that 3 dimensions, or even just using the boost pack to like get yourself up above enemies, that sort of a thing. There is a lot of interesting ways that that could really develop and have some variety variety compared to their previous titles. On top of that variety, we've seen all sorts of different types of guns, as well as melee combat with actual melee weapons and using your fist. There also appears to be like a charged heavy attack as well. At one point, the player does seem to do like a charged melee attack that consumes some stamina. There is also space combat, but I think we're going to save that for its own sort of space-focused video. And on top of, just direct combat like we're talking about here, you've also got all the stealth options, right? Now, it is shown in the direct that there are vents and like sneaky entranceways that feel very arcane to me. Like Bethesda has sometimes done that, but not really so much in the way of like vents, like actual ways that you can sort of crouch and crawl around. It's mostly just like, trying to avoid being seen by like hiding behind a rock or something. But this looks really interesting to me, having different access ways into places. Now, in these stealth scenes, you do see like the hidden with a little stealth bar and sneak levels as well. In one of the shots, you can see that the player can pickpocket the enemy's guns from stealth, and there's like a percentage chance of how they can grab those weapons. I really like that as an option. And then I wonder what happens if you start combat and they have no weapons, right? Do they just like panic? Do they just run at you? I'm curious to see what happens there. And in that same shot on the left, you can actually see an alarm on the wall, which assumedly seems that if the player has alerted the enemies, they will ring the alarm and alert everyone else in that sort of facility that they are in. One thing that I can't wait to explore more of is the different weapon types. So it is mentioned in the direct that there are ballistic weapons, sort of like your, traditional weapons of today. And if they're fired in 0G, you will see that recoil actually push you back. There are energy weapons, which are, I guess, sort of like energy weapons from a Fallout, and the electromagnetic weapons, where each barrel has a laser. And these are sort of like the futuristic sort of weapons, but still grounded in like sort of realism. Now, all of these three different weapon types also have resistances for your spacesuit. So in the spacesuit screen, you can see that there are physical, energy, and EM for electromagnetic resistances. So that'll be something that we'll be thinking about when you're deciding what sort of a spacesuit that you're going to wear. And that armor is really just that single spacesuit and helmet, seems like, based on the screenshots we've seen of the armor screen. Now, inside these three main archetypes, there is some complexities here. Some weapons can actually do both. In the weapon screen, you can see that there are some weapons that'll do both physical and energy weapon. These appear to be linked to rarer sort of weapons. Like later in the direct, we see Eternity's Gate, which is a rare particle beam rifle that does physical and energy damage. Now, this is interesting as well because this is a blue rifle, right? It seems to have 1 star. There is one point as well in the trailer where the player gets a legendary armor drop, which has 3 stars. So one could assume that in between 1 star and 3 star, there's like a 2 star, like a purple epic sort of thing for those sort of weapons. But these weapons that have these like increased rarities seem to have perks as well. So using Eternity's Gate as an example again, it has the hand loading perk, so volatile rounds that are designed to pack a bigger punch but aren't as stable and can fail on occasion. Now, you can also see on this screen as well that there are mods that are put into this weapon. So this weapon has 6 mod slots and there are currently 4 being used. And you can see the weapon's mass, its range, fire rate, its current mag size, the rounds being held, and its accuracy. The weapon stats as a whole seem very similar to their previous titles, but with like a little bit of a specified sort of a take on them, I guess. But it's interesting to see that there will be weapons that'll deal both of these damage types, or multiple damage types, being ballistic and energy. You'll also level up your effectiveness with each weapon type based on your skills. And early in the direct footage, you can see the player gains like a percentage leveling up their ballistic weapons when using a ballistics weapon. I'm interested to know, with things like this that deal both ballistic and energy weapon, will you get progression towards both of those skills, or like say one being the primary? Like, it's interesting, and you can start with a weapon proficiency based on your background, like the cyberneticist that starts with the laser skill. It's also worth mentioning, just like Fallout 4, that ammo has no weight. So we can see early on in the direct that the player does pick up some ammo and it has no actual mass, so it will not weigh anything, which is great because ammo weight is always a super annoying thing to deal with. Maybe there's like a survival mode, or people will mod that in if you want that sort of an aspect, but I'm glad that just via its base like mechanics, it doesn't actually weigh anything. So we did touch on weapon mods, but weapon mods are going to be pretty expansive, it seems like. Now, so weapons themselves will have their own amount of weapon slots. Some have more, some have less. And in order to get some of the better mods, you actually need to go to a research lab, either on your ship or a settlement, wherever, and actually research specific mods. So when you are then modding your weapons using the rifle that the player does mod in the direct as an example, in the mod slots, there is a receiver, internal panel, optic, magazine, and battery, and muzzle. I am curious to know if these are static across all weapons or if they're specific to the weapon type, right? So this is a physical rifle the player is using here. Does an electromagnetic rifle have the same weapons mod slots? Does a energy rifle have the same weapon mod slots? They are different in Fallout 4 depending on the category that they are a part of, so it would make sense here that it's a like similar sort of approach, because this sort of mod system looks very Fallout 4, just sort of like specified, I guess. But you know, you can see as the player chooses a mod, there is a resource cost, which you'll have to gather those resources in order to use that mod, and some of the mods require you to have done that research in order to actually unlock them. Again, very similar to Fallout 4 and actually having the skills required in order to sort of use those mods. The last thing I want to touch on in this combat breakdown is this thing at the end. The player goes all force power and like uses the force or some sort of magic thing to like lower the gravity and like freeze enemies or something. I don't know, it's a little weird, but I'm curious to know exactly what this is. And my guess is it's linked to the story progression and something that whatever happens with those artifacts, they give you some sort of a power and you can do some sort of shenanigans here. But this will definitely be something to do with combat, because that's what this sort of looks like. You know, the player is using this to manipulate the combat encounter. So I thought it was worth mentioning here, but I have no idea what this is. And I'm curious to know what you think it is. So let me know in the comments down below. And also hit that subscribe and the like button, all that YouTube stuff. So let's have a general overview of these companions that was sort of talked about in the direct. So companions will join you as part of the story, or you may find them as you just sort of explore from, say, various factions. I would assume that you'll have companions linked to certain factions that you can recruit. Now, there is an affinity system linked to these companions based on the choices that you make. They will either like the decisions you make or dislike them. Maybe that leads to them leaving your party if you really do things that they don't like. And it's also mentioned that you can blossom those relationships into romances. You can also apparently choose to get an opinion from your companions in some conversation. So if you're really trying to get into that romance or even just build that affinity with them, then you can sort of make those decisions based on that. A clear distinction that I want to make in this video that is talked about in the direct that I think everyone should be aware of is the difference between a companion and a crew member. Think of this like settlers and companions in Fallout 4. You had settlers that were like at your outpost and what have you, and then you had your companions, which were fully fleshed out companions that had their own voice actors and storylines. You could romance them, etc. And you can't really do that with settlers. I think this is very similar to what's going to happen with crew members in Starfield, except there is definitely more to them. So not only do they seem to have a bit more uniqueness to them, just, you know, they all seem to be like named, a little bit of a story there, as you can sort of find them at spaceports and at random events in the world. Speaking of those random events, actually, in the direct we see the player come across Hella at like a sort of like a destroyed moon sort of a thing, and he's obviously one of these crew members. He has 2 skills. Is this the same guy that's at the very start of the game, like that intro scene?
No physical damage. Mentally, the jury's still out.
Still think there might be a spot for me on your ship?
I kind of think it is. Like, I'm not really sure, but they seem very similar in terms of their facial structure and almost in their voice as well. But obviously in this scene, he's wearing a helmet. But I'm curious, let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. So these crew members seem to have like 2 or 3 skills, and all the companions seem to have 4, and their skills are definitely more further along in terms of their ranks than what it seems like the crew members are. The last sort of like companion crew member thing is that you can control seemingly creatures with the xenosociology skill. I don't know if this means you can recruit them or you can just control them for a certain amount of time or what have you, but I would love to create like an army of creatures on like a planet, say like this planet, cool outpost, build the outpost, and you can like have your own farm of creatures. I really hope we can do that. But anyway, a big thing to look at is the outpost sort of crew roster screen. Now, what we initially see here is that on the crew roster screen, you can break down this based on ship, your current outpost, and your outpost in general. On this screen, we can also see that the player has Barrett, a companion with 4 skills, Sam Coe, a companion with 4 skills, and Sarah Morgan, another companion with 4 skills. And then the 2 crew members being the Marika boards and Hella, as well as the mini security bot, which doesn't have any skills. And I assume that's just because they're like, you know, a robot. I don't know if Vasco will have skills. That's an interesting thing that we may need to wait and see if he's sort of the same as a security mini bot. But what we can see on this screen here is a couple of things. So not only can we see the different skills that these have, but you can see that certain skills are highlighted. And when the player assigns Hella to an outpost, the outpost engineering skill highlights, indicating that these skills are actually in use based on their current assignment in the crew roster screen. So you can see that they're using those skills. While this screen doesn't really show that there's a lot that you can add to the crew roster, I believe that you're going to be able to scroll further down this list, right? Because we can see in the ship customization screens that you can have like 6 or 7 crew members on a single ship, and this screen only shows you 6 available. So I assume that you're going to be able to apply more than, say, 6 actual crew members and companions to different things, but I really like the complexities in this system. It seems like it's a much more advanced version of being able to assign settlers and companions to different settlements in the Fallout system, and it actually means something here. Really like how this is sort of developed from the old Fallout system. Skills and traits will also affect your relationships and your connections with everyone. So firstly, in traits, we see that there is an introvert and an extrovert trait. So the introvert trait, you really need your alone time. Exerting yourself uses less oxygen, which is basically stamina, when adventuring alone, but more when adventuring with other human companions. The interesting thing to point out here is it says human companions. So assumedly then if you've got Vasco with you, this doesn't get affected by introvert, and extrovert is the opposite of this, right? Assumedly the more human companions you have, the less oxygen then that you'll actually consume because you're not adventuring alone. We do also see the Adoring Fan, which is a recruitable crew member / companion. Not exactly sure which category they fit into, but they definitely want to be brought with you because obviously they're your biggest fan, but also from their skills, right? So they have scavenging to allow you to find more things, concealment for stealth, and weightlifting to carry more of your burdens. So there's definitely value to that, but what category the Adoring Fan fits into, we don't know, but he obviously is related to that sort of crew companion system. There is also kid stuff. I wonder if you can actually get your parents to like come with you, you know, like come into your ship and stuff, or if they're just like locked into their home, not really sure there. And then there's the religious traits, which may also play a role. So the main one we see in the direct is the Serpent's Embrace, but there are these religious traits which may play a role in whether certain companions will join you or if certain companions feel a certain way about you. In the skills, we've seen a couple of actual skills that seem to be related to this. Now, there is the social tree, which is related to all sorts of social aspects, but one of the key things we see here is the leadership skill, which will make companions gain affinity 15% faster. This is a really interesting skill, which is obviously going to be important if you're looking to build those romances and connections with all of your companions, and the xenosociology skill, which we touched on a little bit earlier, which allows you to have some sort of control over creatures. But if there's any other skills related to these sort of social aspects, we don't yet know, but there is a lot of skills in the social tree. Let's cover off all the known companions. Now, in previous titles, we can probably expect pretty much a companion for all of the major factions. Like that's sort of generally what Bethesda go for, though it does seem like there is a lot more for Constellation because of their connection to the main story. Now, Sarah Morgan is the first one that we see, and she's an ex-soldier and adventurer. She's Constellation's leader. Sarah joins you to help find the artifacts or until that lead runs dry, and assumedly because of this, she'll be one of the first companions you get because that artifact connection is a core part of the narrative. And we see her skills here that she starts off with, which is astrodynamics, lasers, leadership, and botany. Astrodynamics increases your grav drive capacity, and obviously lasers is for laser rifles. Leadership we talked about earlier. Botany, I actually don't know what that does, so let me know in the comments if you do know what botany is. Next we see Sam Coe, the former space cowboy. I don't actually know what makes you a former space cowboy. He still looks like a space cowboy to me, but he also seems to be a part of the Freestar Collective. So again, that sort of faction-based companion. The skills we see for Sam here are piloting, so it will help you sort of pilot your ship, assumedly, like maybe make maneuvers a little bit easier. Rifle certification, so they are better with rifles. Payloads, which increases the amount of mass that your ships can store. And geology, which is like the study of rocks, so assumedly something to do with being able to scan rocks, get some more rocks, resources, or something. I don't know.
I like that boulder. That is a nice boulder.
Next up, we see Barrett. Now, he seemingly is a member of Constellation, and he strikes me as sort of like the vanilla companion, right? Like the companion that's not really going to feel very strongly about anything. He's just sort of like a gun-ho guy who's going to sort of follow you and have a good time, right? Now we see that his skills here are Starship Engineering, Particle Beam Weapon System, which increases the effectiveness of those types of weapons on your Starship, Robotics, which increases the damage done to robots, and Gastronomy, which is like a chef skill, so assumedly Barrett can do some cooking for you. The homie Vasco is assumedly also a companion. Now we don't know know if he has any skills, but we do know that he attack and he protect and he a good boy and we love him. So that's all we need to say about Vasco. There are others mentioned as part of like the Constellation group, but we don't rightly 100% know if they're all going to be companions. I wouldn't think they would be, because that's a lot of Constellation specific companions. Maybe they can just join you as sort of like crew members, that sort of a thing, but we'll just go through them anyway. So firstly, we've got Mateo, which is a theologian that believes that there's something out there, like, you know, intelligent aliens. That seems to be his interest with the artifact. We've got Noelle, who is a gifted scientist and seemingly second in command for Constellation. Now, if she is sort of a companion, they're obviously going to be sort of science-based skills because of her gifted scientist abilities. We've also got Walter, who's the businessman in the settled systems. Now, he is the Constellation's financer, and we've got Vlad, which is an ex-pirate, assumedly some sort of Crimson Fleet connection there, and if he was a companion, you know, you've got those physical skills. So there is definitely differences between these 4 characters and if they do choose to join you, but I'm not sure if they are actually going to be fully fleshed out companions or if they're just sort of like, you know, the extra members of Constellation that won't come with you on your journey. Firstly, let's cover off some updates from the gameplay reveal last year to the direct this year. I found it really interesting to go through both of these trailers and try and find different things that have changed. And there is actually a fair few things when you look at the different backgrounds and skills and traits. So firstly, in traits specifically, they have had a pretty major overhaul. You'll notice that the list on the right-hand side is actually in a different order, and this is because a number of traits have actually changed names. Starter Home was renamed to Dream Home. Unwanted Hero is now Hero Worshipped. Kid Stuff got a bit of a wording change as well. So Kid Stuff originally said that you would spend 10% of your income to have your parents, and now it's only 2%. So assumedly they thought in terms of balancing that 10% was way too much. And I tend to agree, right? That's a fair amount just to, you know, have some parents. But there is other things that have changed. One of the key things as well is the diplomat background was changed from persuasion, diplomacy, and bargaining to persuasion, commerce, and wellness. Assumedly this is because different skills have actually changed different tiers. So when you're looking at the skill screen, you can see here that they're sort of separated in tiers. You've got like your, you know, top tier, which is like gray, and then blue, and then epic, and then orange, similarly mirroring like the weapon rarity system. And you can see that some skills further down the line require you to invest further into those skill tree before you can actually unlock them. So assumedly here, something like the diplomacy skill and bargaining were changed to be further down in that social line, whereas commerce and wellness were put up a little bit higher. So that's why those skills were sort of changed out. But I just thought it was worth mentioning here that, you know, this still seems to be like fluid in terms of things that are changing. And so anything that we break down here, right, which I'm going to go through all the skills, backgrounds, and traits that we know of, these may actually change. Like wording may change, like the different values may actually change as well. So I thought it was just worth sort of mentioning here. Let's jump into skills first. So how skills work essentially is that every time you level up, you will gain a skill point, and then you spend that skill point to get the first rank of a different skill. And then in order to unlock the next ranks for those skills, you have to actually complete that skill. Say for example, with ballistics weapons, you need to actually use ballistic weapons to then increase that overall damage percentage further, but you'll be able to do this to then increase those challenges to unlock the higher ranks. In the skills, we see that there is a physical tree which covers things like carrying capacity, endurance, melee combat. There is a social tree, which is your dialogue options, your leadership skills, those sort of NPC interactions, as well as those diplomat skills we talked about earlier. You've got combat, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's like, you know, your weapon skills, your damage, those sort of things. Science seems to be related to crafting, research, lab things, as well as scanning planets. Tech is everything that doesn't fit into the other bucket. So things like your robot skill, your security skill, outpost skills, and all of your starship skills and customization all fit within the tech category. Now, seemingly because of that progression system in each of the skills that we briefly see, where if you hover over a skill where you haven't invested into that tree, it does require investments before you can unlock some of those higher level skills. So something you should be thinking about with these different skill trees is which ones you want to focus on. Now, we don't know yet what the level cap is for Starfield, and assumedly if you look at their other titles, there won't be a level cap, so you should be able to just like keep getting skills as you see fit. But in the early stages to mid game, you're really probably going to want to commit to a couple of trees so you can unlock those higher level skills in those different lines, because obviously the higher level skills are much more valuable than the lower level skills. I would consider this system in terms of its skills to be a weird hybrid between Fallout 4's big perk tree, as you know, the perks that are higher level or further down that tree, require more investment. And on the other half side of things, as Skyrim's way of unlocking skills based on actually using them, because you not only have to unlock the specific skill, you've then got to level it up by the challenges linked to those specific skills, right? So it's a weird hybrid between the two, and I actually like this system. I think it's a good sort of breadth of allowing you to have the freedom to choose what you want to do, but while also actually getting levels for skills by actually using them, because that sort of makes sense that you should use them to actually level them up. Let's move on to backgrounds, and then we'll talk about traits. But these two are the ones that I really think that you should be thinking about now and deciding on roughly what you want to go for with your first playthrough, because I don't want to be spending all day in the character creator. Like, I love character creation, and I'm definitely going to be spending a lot of time here across my different playthroughs, but my first playthrough, I just want to get into the game, right? Like, I just want to play the video game. So I'm definitely going to like make sure I know exactly what I'm going to go first and then jump straight into it. But let's break down the backgrounds that we know of right now. We will start with chef, which comes with gastronomy, which will then allow you to craft special food and drink and potentially research different recipes. It also comes with dueling to increase your overall melee damage, and scavenging, which assumedly allows you to find more loot, like things like ammo and credits, that sort of thing. A solid option for anyone who wants to play a melee character because of dueling, and then I assume because of the food items that you can make, you'll be able to create some sort of buffs there that will then be able to buff your overall like melee damage or physical resistances, that sort of thing. That'll help in those scenarios as well. Combat medic increases your pistol certification, so your overall damage with a pistol. Medicine, which increases the amount of healing you get from health packs, and wellness, which we don't exactly know, but my guess is it just increases your overall HP. So a pretty solid option all around, especially for someone that maybe struggles a little bit in combat, because you get the extra healing from medicine plus the extra HP or overall wellness from the wellness skill. But there's definitely better options if you want to narrowly focus on something. This is a very broad sort of background. Next is Cyber Runner, which got a massive change from the 2022 gameplay reveal. This now comes with stealth, which obviously improves your stealth efficiency, security to allow you to hack different locks, and theft to improve your overall pickpocketing skills. So this is now like any sort of a thief, or, you know, I don't want to say bad guy, right? Because not all thieves are bad guys, but if you want to play that sort of, you know, maybe smuggler type sort of character and steal things, that's definitely the background that you want to pick. Cyberneticist comes with medicine again. It also comes with security to hack those locks, and lasers to improve your efficiency with laser weapons. So this is also another good one, right? You get medicine, you get security so you can hack things, and lasers if you want to use laser rifles, also a really solid starting background. Diplomat we've already covered, so we won't cover that here. And the last one is Explorer. Now, Explorer comes with lasers, which we already just talked about, and astrodynamics, which says it can coax more capability out of your ship's grav drive, so assumedly allow you to travel further between star systems, and surveying, which says it deciphers data on the ground, so probably something to do with scanning and allowing you to get more information based on your scans when you scan things. Now, there are plenty of other backgrounds that we just haven't seen too much of yet, right? So we see Beast Hunter, Bouncer, Bounty Hunter, Gangsters, Homesteader, Industrialist, Long Hauler, Pilgrim, Professor, and Ronin. All these backgrounds don't only affect your skills, but you can also use them in conversations. Like we see the player go into a bar and use the Beast Hunter background to take that contract from that NPC. So these will definitely come into play, not only in your actual starting skills, but in conversations as well. Lastly, we have traits. Now, traits are mentioned to be optional. You don't have to take traits, but you can take up to 3 of them. I would say to take them, right? It's going to add more to your role-playing elements, regardless of which ones you take. So I definitely think that taking some sort of traits would be a fun thing to do. So breaking these down, what we have seen is Alien DNA, which will allow you to have a higher health pool and greater endurance, but healing items are less effective. Dream Home, originally Starter Home, which will allow you to have a small house on a moon for the cost of 50,000 credits, which maybe that number has changed now that it's a dream home, not a starter home. Empath, which you are deeply connected to your feelings around you. Performing actions your companions like will result in a temporary increase to combat effectiveness, but performing actions they don't like will have a precise opposite effect. So if you're looking to really be connected to your companions, Empath is for you. Extrovert and introvert go hand in hand. So extrovert, when you have human companions with you, you consume less oxygen or stamina, and introvert is the exact opposite. The Freestar Collective Settler allows you to gain access to specific Freestar Collective dialogue options and get better rewards from missions from Freestar Collective, but crime bounties towards other factions is greatly increased. Assumedly, the trait United Colonies Native is exactly exactly the same as this, except the faction here is the United Colonies rather than the Freestar Collective. The big one that we see in the trailer is the Adoring Fan, or Hero Worshipped as it is now called compared to Unwanted Hero, where you get this bad boy that'll come with you, he'll just talk a lot and give you gifts, and we've seen sort of what happens there. We saw kid stuff, so you have some parents and they do have a home that you can visit, but you automatically send 2% of your credits home to them every week. These next two have seemingly changed as well, and we're going to do them together as they're sort of like connected, right? So there's Raised Universal and Raised Enlightened. Now, originally this said that you grew up as a member of the Sanctum Universe, you gain a significant discount at the church store, but lose access to the Enlightened store. This has changed now in the direct. You grew up as a member of the Sanctum Universum, you gain access to a special chest full of items in the Sanctum Universum in New Atlantis, but lose access to the House of Enlightened chest. So it's not necessarily a store, it's like a special chest now. Does that mean that you can still access the Enlightened store if you are Raised Universal and vice versa? Is that store still even in the game? We don't know, but it's just something to think about. The other religious trait is Serpent's Embrace, which we saw in the original gameplay reveal that says that you worship the Great Serpent. Grav jumping provides a temporary boost to health and endurance, but health and endurance are lowered if you don't continually jump regularly like an addiction. I have a feeling this has changed because this is still a religious trait, but we see in that trailer that the player uses Serpent's Embrace to like distract the serpent's, worshippers so they don't have to fight them. I think that maybe this has changed to be a little bit more similar to the other religious traits, but we'll have to wait and see until we actually can see what this looks like at the original game. I forgot to mention this one when we were talking about the faction allegiance traits, but there is the Neon Street Rat, which is the Neon Street version of the other religious traits, right? So you get the special dialogue options and the extra rewards, but crime bounties for other factions is greatly increased. Spaced will allow you to have more health and endurance when you are in space, but they are decreased when on the surface, and you can't combine this with Terra Firma, which is assumedly the complete opposite of that. And then the last one that we haven't exactly seen the wording, but we have seen is Wanted. So you get a damage buff when your health is low, but mercenaries will randomly spawn and attack you. Now, because of this full breakdown with the gameplay reveal and the direct, we've basically seen essentially every single one of the traits you can possibly have. So this is a decision that you can actually make before you have played the game. So you can go back and watch this part of the video again, even the background section, because we've got a clear view of what this is going to be. So let's first talk about that space navigation. Now, something that has been spoken about for a fair while is that you don't actually take off from the planets or land on the planets. It's like a cutscene transition, which is, I just think, a thing worth mentioning because, it's something like a core part of like No Man's Sky or anything. There's a lot of comparisons there, but this is obviously a different game. But you will be able to land virtually anywhere on those planets just by clicking a place to land, and then you'll see that cutscene transition as you land. Now, star systems will have a required level, and this is an important distinction to make when you are navigating throughout space. Not only will they have a required level to say, advise you whether you should go to that area, but in order to be able to plot a course to different star systems, you will require a particular grav drive plus a certain amount of fuel in order to actually make that star system travel to be ordered to get there. Now, fuel consumption and that like level requirement is going to be a progression method to sort of control where you can go in the early stages of the game. As you sort of get further, you'll be able to expand out a little bit further and upgrade your ship and that sort of thing. And as you can see on these screens during the direct, you can actually see the jump, which is indicating the jump required, the jump range, so your ship's actual jump range in terms of like the light years that it can go, as well as the distance, so how far to that location. You can also see the cargo hold, which is how much your ship is actually carrying. I'm curious whether this actually affects how much your fuel consumption is. Like, say if you've got like nothing stored in your ship, maybe you don't actually use as much fuel as if your ship is like full of contraband, you know what I mean? So once you have selected where you're going and whether you have to jump between multiple star systems or just the one in order to get there, you will need to power up your grav drive, which is how you make those jumps to light speed in order to travel to the different systems, right? So depending on how much energy allocation you have to the grav drive, it will either take a longer or less amount of time in order to actually trigger that grav drive effect. And we'll talk about energy allocation in a little bit. But while you are navigating around in general space, you will come across those random encounters, same as you would on the ground in like a Bethesda game. An example that I really like is the grandma that invites you over to have a meal, but there's also like big star yards that you can go and visit, as well as massive military fleets that you can go and explore inside those areas as well. They may have quests for you, they'll have people to talk to, or some other things that you may find out in the world, like traders, that sort of a thing. But there's plenty that happens just in space, right? Regardless of just combat. But let's talk about your own ship in space, right? So you've got your ship and you'll have multiple ships that you'll be able to choose from. But for you as a character, if you plan to spend a lot of time in space, it's also really important that you have skills that are beneficial to your actual space exploration. We haven't seen yet if there is like a clear sort of background or something like that that affects space and what it is. But my expectation is the long hauler background is going to be ship centered because of just the name of that. But there is plenty of skills, especially in the tech line, that are all related to not only ship combat, but just like ship stuff in general, right? So you've got payload in there, which increases your ship storage capacity. You've got piloting, which we don't exactly know what it does, but it would make sense if it's something to do with like helping you control your ship, do maneuvers, that sort of thing. Sam Coe has both of these skills as a companion that you can recruit. Starship engineering, again, we don't know what that does exactly. Target control system, we do, which is basically like VATS for your ship, right? It'll allow you to disable certain parts of a ship. An example shown in the direct is that you can use it to take out the engines of a ship and then the player can actually board them. So if you're looking to do some, space piracy in that way, you would then need the targeting control system, take out the engines, board the ship, kill the people in there, steal their sandwiches, you know how it goes. Now, starship design is one that we see a brief snippet of in the trailer as well, which is required to upgrade your ship with certain ship components. Now, I'm going to have a separate video breaking down all the ship customization upgrades and stuff, because like I was going to put it in this video, but there is like so much of it and this video would go forever, so I've decided to split it out. But the weapon damaging skills are probably the main one that you want to think about, especially when we start talking about ship combat in a little bit. So there are multiple different weapon systems that you can apply to your ship, from ballistics to lasers to missiles to particle beams and the electromagnetic. These all have a matching skill in the tech line that is a various level of progression through, right? So ballistic seems to be the first one as it's at the top, and then the more tech points that you actually invest into this tree, you'll be able to get some of the more advanced weapon systems, like say missile weapon systems or the particle beam systems, which is further down in that tech line. But it is also worth mentioning that your crew will be on your ship, and your ship does have a crew capacity, which you'll be able to change based on your ship customization. And those crew members that are assigned to your ship will also give skills and various buffs to the overall ship's efficiency, like we see in the crew roster screen, that these skills are actually in use based on their current assignment. So the crew members that you take with you, whether you find them in spaceports, around the world, or even companions, will impact your overall ship's efficiency as well as the way it runs based on their actual skills. Ship combat is going to be a massive part of this game, I think. Like, you're going to obviously be doing combat on the ground, but ship combat and space navigation is definitely going to be a big part. Now, during the direct, we see a lot of space combat as well as some dogfighting. We see lots of big fleets of ships and various sizes of ships and things that you can overall interact with and even just talk to. You don't have to engage in combat. Same as I guess you would like on the ground, right? You're not going to fight everything that you come across, but you've got a lot of weapon systems at your disposal, and it all sort of really relates to that energy allocation system. So we may as well talk about that first. But when you're in your ship, you have this energy allocation system where you can apply energy to either your weapon systems that you have currently applied. Say in this example, you've got LAS for lasers, BAL for ballistics, and MSL for missile systems. And then on the other side, you've got ENG for engine, SHD for shield, and GRV for grav drive. So how you apply your energy will affect the overall effectiveness and efficiency of your ship. So in combat, you've got a decision to make as to how you want to apply that energy. So if you want to be able to, say, refresh your weapons faster to shoot more often, increase that fire rate, you'll put it into particular types of the weapon systems. Or if you, say, want to move better, fly faster, maneuver a bit more, you put it into engines. You want more protection or defense, you put that into shields. And then grav drive allocation will allow you to make that jump to light speed much faster. And we do actually see a shot of exactly that in the direct, where the player increases the energy allocation to the grav drive and it increases or decreases the speed to how quickly you can actually make that jump. So the weapons on the left side that you have three, it does seem like you'll only be able to have three particular weapon systems applied, but there is more than three. In a couple of the shots, we see like PAR for the particle beam systems or EM for the electromagnetic systems. So that left-hand side really is seemingly dependent on the weapon systems you've got applied, and then engineering, shield, and grav seem much more static because I don't really think you're going to be able to remove those systems from your ship. That seems a little weird. But overall, this energy allocation system is going to be crucial to your overall space navigation as well as your space combat, because it's going to be a decision you're going to have to make on the fly, right, in the middle of combat, to where you're actually applying that energy and how you're applying it to make your ship the most effective amount possible. I haven't been able to find exact confirmation of this, but if you have, let me know in the comments. But it seems to me that like logic would dictate that these different weapon systems are better at damage damaging different things to other ships. Say, for example, lasers would do more damage to shields, right? That makes logical sense to me, and it is definitely something that Bethesda would put into these sort of games, and it sort of mirrors the different resistances when you're fighting on the ground, right? To like ballistics, lasers, and EM. It sort of mirrors that in terms of ship customization, right? So I can definitely see that being there, but I haven't seen that as a concrete thing that's been announced, but it does seem like that would be something they would include, because it gives you've got all these different weapon systems you can use. They really should be using them in that sort of a way to be able to apply them, right? And you've got that laser, ballistics, missile sort of systems that not only would have different amounts of damage and fire rates, that sort of a thing, but definitely in terms of resistances, I think should be added as well. Now, a big thing that we see in the trailer, which is going to be something that's probably going to appear in a lot of videos about how you actually board ships, is the target control system. So we see the player applies this and they use it to target specific systems on a ship. And then a little bit later, we see the player has actually disabled the engine on a ship, because you can see on their health bar that the engine is red as if it's disabled, and then the player boards that ship. So if you're looking to board ships, that would be how you would do that, is by disabling their engine, and then they're stuck in like the, just the vastness of space. You can just pull up your ship, board them, kill them, take all their stuff. That's not all though. We do also see that the player can actually loot the remains of a ship if you do actually blow it up. So you will still get some sort of resources and materials out of that if you don't actually board the ship, but assumedly it'll be less, right? It seems like boarding a ship and using that sort of a mechanic, especially if you steal a ship and then you have to go take it back to a spaceport to register it to make it your ship, or even to sell it, which would seemingly be more of a late game thing. I don't think, you're just going to be able to bounce out of Constellation and go and steal another ship, right? That seems like that would ruin the economy, so I wouldn't be expecting that to be something you can do until much, much later in terms of your overall playthrough. The last thing that I want to leave you here to think about, and something that I'm interested in your opinion in as well, is there are a couple of times where we see the players, say, roll up on a big military fleet where they've got this massive military freighter with like smaller ships around them, or even in dogfights with multiple different ships and different things happening around them, right? It would be interesting to me, especially with this crew like roster system, and how you can also, if you look at the ship customization screen, right, you can have 9 of your own ships and you have a home ship. I am curious, especially with the size that you can make your own ship, if you can actually control a fleet as well, like, or if you can have, say, assign your companion to another ship that can like follow you or come to combat encounters with you. It's interesting to me, like we have seen no confirmation of this at all, or like if this is a thing that can be possible, but I am just very curious around how deep that system is, right? It seems highly unlikely that if you are going to engage like a massive military fleet with a giant freighter and like, all these different starfighters with them, that you're going to be able to logically take them out yourself as one ship. Like technically, you're obviously, the biggest badass in this universe, because that's how these games work, but that just seems like it's missing something to me. I feel like that's got to be something there, right? But I'm curious to know what you guys think in the comments. Let's first cover customizing your ship. Now, before you can customize a ship, you do need to register it. So that includes if you have, say, stolen a ship or found one out in the world. Who knows if you can just like find derelict ships around, but you will have to register it before you can actually customize it. You will also apparently need the Starship design skill in order to upgrade certain parts of your ship, similar to, say, how you would mod your armor or weapons in Fallout. You will need a specific skill in order to purchase specific ship upgrades and building materials. There are 13 different components, and what each of these does we will break down shortly, but you've essentially got 3 options when you're choosing what to upgrade from these different components. The first is to upgrade that specific part, which will essentially just, increase its overall stats and it won't change the overall look of your ship. You can then jump into the ship builder, which will allow you to essentially customize the entire ship, or you could simply, buy or steal other ships and not even worry about upgrading if you so choose. We also see a home ship, which indicates like your main ship that you'll be using. This will be the ship that you'll take everywhere. My guess as well is that there'll be ways to like summon your ship, say, your crew will like fly it over to you if you're like ages away from you, sort of like, summoning a horse in these games, right? You know what I mean? So let's start with the ship overview screen, and then we'll get into the nitty gritty stuff. So from this ship overview screen on the left, we first see the ship's systems, which is that energy allocation. I broke this down on my ship travel and combat video, so go and check that if you haven't, if you want full information there. But other than that, now the main thing that we see here, other than the different allocation in the ship overview, is the indication of fuel, so how far your grav drive can actually take you in terms of its fuel consumption. We see the hull, which is your like ship's overall defenses, so like its armor rating, you know, and we see cargo, which this dev absolutely has weight or mass turned off, right? You can see how much they're actually carrying on this ship. Now, interesting thing to point out here as well is shielded capacity. Now, this to me is going to be linked with the contraband system. Say you can hide like or smuggle things by shielding some of your cargo. So when you get scanned, as you say enter, as we see in the direct, when they enter that system and they go through like a contraband scan, say if you've got a various amount of things that you're trying to smuggle, it needs to be shielded so that you can avoid that contraband scanning. Now, further on this list, we also see reactor, which if you count the little lines, there's 14 of them. So your reactor directly indicates the amount of energy that your ship will have. We see the crew amount, so how many crew can be on the ship. Jump is referring to how many light years the ship can jump in one jump. So there'll be lots of star systems that you'll need to actually travel to via a certain amount of light years, and some of them might be further away. So the more your grav drive can actually jump in terms of light years, the further you'll be able to go. Shield, which indicates another defensive stat. So before you take hull damage, you'll need to get through the shield. So obviously having a good amount of shields is important. And then the last three are your weapon systems. So in this screenshot, we've got lasers, ballistics, and missile systems connected to this ship, but you'll be able to change that depending on the weapon systems that you actually have applied. So from this screen on the left here, we can see there's two options. There's ship builder and upgrade ship. So in the upgrade ship screen, this will allow you to quickly upgrade specific components of your ship without diving deep into shipbuilding or adding major components to the ship. It's really just upgrading things you have. A good example that's used in the direct is upgrading your various weapons. And I did mention in my previous video that I wasn't sure if you could say weapons would do more damage to shield or hull or something like that. You can actually see this here with the Mauler autocannon that does 18 hull damage and only 6 shield damage. So it does more damage to hulls. So you'll probably want to use something else, maybe a laser weapon to get rid of that shield, and then use these to finish it off by dealing the hull damage. But let's have a look at the 13 different components that you'll be able to upgrade and add. First, we'll talk about cowling. Now, cowling is described as the structural components that are largely cosmetic and allow you to modify your ship's shape, size, personality, and silhouette. So if you want your ship to look a specific way, cowling is probably the way you'll go about that. Shield generator, I mean, that's pretty obvious. That's like your shield, so your defenses. Docker is your entry or exit point when boarding other ships in space. So it would be like the little circular system that allow you to connect to other ships. Fuel tanks are your fuel, so more fuel tanks means more fuel capacity to travel further. Your grav drive, which we all sort of know what is, that'll be connecting to how far you'll be able to jump to different systems via light years. Weapon systems will be a big one. So there are plenty of different weapon systems for starships. Now, this will also, when you're looking at the different weapon systems, we can see the class of them, their range, the fire rate, the hull, the shield damage, their max power, the hull, and all that stuff. Like you can see all this on the weapon upgrade screen. Now, these weapons will do more damage to specific parts, like I mentioned, but it will also be important that you have various skills, because there are skills linked to all of these different weapon systems in the tech tree, which I did break down in my other video as well. HAB, or HAB, stands for Habitat Modules. Now, this is basically like the major living areas, right? So in the shipbuilder section, we can see there's like the companionway, the all-in-one berth, a storeroom, engineering bay, captain's quarters, computer core. So think of things like your, say, crafting rooms or storage rooms. Those sort of things will all be like habitat modules that you'll add to your ship, and that will significantly increase the overall size of your ship, because these are definitely going to be larger areas for the ship itself. Engines relate to the general maneuverability, the top speed and movement of your ship when you're just moving around in space, not when you're traveling via like light speed, you're just sort of moving around. Cockpit is pretty self-explanatory. It's where you go when you're flying this big bad ship, and also control your flight path from here. The cargo hold is your overall storage, so you'll store things in here. Obviously, the more cargo hold you have, the more mass it can hold. And we did talk about shielded capacity a little bit earlier. Reactor is your max energy allocation, so how much energy you have available to you to put into those weapon systems, or the shield, the engine, or the grav drive. Now, we can see the player upgrading the reactor at one point, adding the ion beam H10 1010, and this generates 16 power. It has a class, it has a repair rate, a reactor health, and just a general health. Not sure what the difference is. And it's interesting to point out that they are separate because this clearly means something. There's also a crew rating here, so maybe they like specific reactors, sort of like makes them happy, a bit like settlers in Fallout when you add like decor and stuff to your settlement, something like that. And the landing gears, well, that's pretty obvious what that is. So in the ship builder, you can fully customize your ship's design, and in the direct we see a whole bunch of completely different layouts, designs, and color systems. And I wanted to break down these a little bit because we get a little bit more specific when you get into the nitty-gritty of this. We can see that you have to test the flight of these ships you build. We even see errors if the ship is, say, missing parts. And in one point we can see the player adds a grav drive which clears the error, and it's like the final piece for that to make the ship nominal. Then you can run a flight check. We also see warnings at various points, say when this ship has like a huge mass and cargo, so maybe that's what the warning is, but there's plenty of information on this screen that we don't get in the ship overview. It's displayed in a different way, so it is sort of similar, but we see those weapon systems, we see the total hull as well as the total shields, the cargo size, the max crew that can be on the ship, the jump range, which we've already talked about. Mobility is an interesting one. I'm curious to know exactly what this references, right? Is that just like how maneuverable the ship is in space? Like, you know, you can pull off spinning and other cool tricks like that, and like how this relates to top speed, so how fast that overall ship can go. I'm curious to know if this is related to mass, right? So you've got like the total mass of the ship. Maybe if the ship has a really high mass, it affects the overall top speed and maneuverability and mobility of the ship. Not sure exactly there, but there's a lot to break down here, and I can't wait to get my hands on it and really dive into the shipbuilding system. We'll start with the obvious one, and the one that every player will seemingly be a part of, and that is Constellation. Now, unfortunately, it seems like you're going to have to join Constellation as part of the main quest. The way that I would like to think about this is think about, say, the Minutemen in Fallout 4, right? You have to join them as part of the main quest, but they don't really impact anything outside of that. You know, there's not really much choice and consequence there. They're just sort of a faction that pushes that main narrative. But Constellation are the last remaining space explorers in the galaxy. Trying to discover what's out there is sort of their main purpose. Now, they have a home base in New Atlantis, which we do see as the player makes contact with them very early in the main campaign, once they have come in contact with one of these artifacts. Now, we have seen a lot about Constellation and their several members, which I do have a video which breaks down all of the companions and everything, so I don't want to rehash too much of that here because I have already covered it. But from what we know about Constellation, they are those last remaining space explorers, and they're the last ones in this whole galaxy that are looking for what else is out there. And finding the artifact that the player does early in the story will propel you to meet Constellation, and then propel them to try and find out what the go is with these artifacts and learn more about where they came from and the history behind them. The United Colonies are the most powerful military presence in the settled systems, and they're also the galaxy's like major political and governmental force that they do have. So the United Colonies is one of these two major factions in the settled systems, with the other being the Freestar Collective, which we'll talk about shortly. So because of this power, they do have a big control over these systems in the settled systems. Now, the UC's capital city is New Atlantis on the planet Jemison in the Alpha Centauri system, which we have seen back when they were doing the location insights as well as in the developer direct. Now, New Atlantis is a large spaceport city, and it's the capital of the United Colonies, and we don't know heaps about the exacts of what you'll find here, but this does seem like the first major hub that the player will go to, not only because of the level of the Alpha Centauri system, but because the Constellation faction is also located here. So chances are you'll spend a lot of time in New Atlantis, and it'll be one of those first locations that you go to. We have also seen that the United Colonies is in charge of Sidonia, the colony on Mars, that mining colony we have seen in the Starfield Direct. Now, the United Colonies is a big force in the game, and just 20 years before the events of the main story, the United Colonies was at war with the Freestar Collective. In that conflict, which was known as the Colony War, the United Colonies did come out on top and are now considered to be that major force in the galaxy. Now, because of the imagery we've seen from them, they seem to be a bit more militaristic. Maybe you could consider them to be like the Brotherhood of Steel sort of faction for Starfield. If I had to relate it to another Bethesda faction, is what I would sort of say from what we've seen. Very militaristic in their structure, as well as presenting themselves to be very formidable and in charge of everything around them. The Freestar Collective, however, is the complete opposite. Now, they've been described as the space western fantasy, and they give me Firefly vibes. You know that old TV show? Great TV show, by the way. Shame it only got one season. But this confederation of 3 star systems is united by their belief in the sanctity of personal freedom and individuality, and their capital is Akela City, which we have seen in the direct and again in those location insights videos. So Akela City is a city where the people believe in the sanctity of personal freedom and individuality. This city is actually walled off from the rest of the planet to keep out the Ashtar, which is an alien predator race that is mentioned to be a hybrid between a wolf and a velociraptor. I also found in my research that the city was founded by someone called Solomon Coe, and a companion that the player can have in the game is called Sam Coe. Coincidence? I think not. Based on where the Freestar Collective are in terms of their control of the galaxy and sort of their limited amount of people, it seems like this will be much more of a group of individuals that are for the collective, right? So they may do some bad or nefarious deeds as long as it benefits the Freestar Collective. I was trying to think of a Bethesda faction comparison for Freestar Collective, and I couldn't really come up with one, so let me know if you've got any ideas in the comments below. The Crimson Fleet, however, are a group of nefarious space pirates. Now, you could definitely consider these guys like the Raider faction from the Nuka World DLC in Fallout 4. And just like in that DLC, you'll be able to join the Crimson Fleet. You can also betray them if you choose by reporting back on their nefarious and pirating deeds to, say, probably the United Colonies. But they have a headquarters at the Key in the Krek system, which is like a massive spaceport that's clearly orbiting a planet. So they seem to be sort of a faction that believes that, you know, anything is theirs. They can just take whatever they like. They're sort of like a advanced Raider faction, probably only for themselves, very selfish. If you're going to join the Crimson Fleet and sort of be a part of that pirate lifestyle, I would fully expect that their faction storyline will see you with a lot of betrayal, either betraying yourself or betraying other members of the faction. Betrayal is probably going to be a key part of the Crimson Fleet, I would assume. We haven't seen if there is going to be a companion directly linked with the Crimson Fleet, though I would expect there would be, but we do know Barrett does have some connection with them from his voice line in the Starfield Direct. Ryujin Industries is going to be another big player. Now, little is known about this mega corporation, as we haven't seen them really shown off or spoken about other than in the Into the Starfield episode 2, where it was mentioned that you can join this faction and it's one of the developers' favorite factions because you join them by essentially applying for a job. We do know, however, that they will be a big player in Neon City, and along with Xenofresh Corporation. Xenofresh were the corporation that essentially founded Neon, and it was originally a fishing platform on an aquatic world, but it was retooled to be a pleasure city by the Xenofresh Corporation because they discovered this alien fish which had valuable psychotropic qualities. So the drug is legal on Neon, and Xenofresh sort of run the city in this sort of cyberpunk theme, and Ryujin Industries are another corporation that is on Neon, and potentially in other locations too, like we don't rightly know if they are. For some wild speculation here, my guess is that joining Ryujin Industries is going to have a lot to do with Neon and the Xenofresh Corporation and what's happening with the drug on Neon. It's going to be a big sticking point for that sort of faction story, I assume, but we'll have to wait and see to know a little bit more about it. There are also plenty of minor factions that we have seen. House Varun is probably the main one we saw the most of in the direct. Now, this is a group of fanatical religious zealots that follow the Serpent. Now, because of the Serpent's embrace trait, we have seen an example of this in the trailer where the player comes across a House Varun ship, uses the Serpent trait to avoid combat. And we've also seen the player fight several Varun zealots as well as robots that are from the Varun faction. So they are definitely going to be maybe a major faction, but we don't know if there's any story here. And conversely, we do know that there are two other religious traits, being the Enlighten and the Sanctum Universum. So similar to House Varun, one would assume that there are factions linked to the Enlighten and the Sanctum Universum because these are religious traits as well. So they may have members that you'll come across not only on New Atlantis, but in other locations as well. The Red Mile is another one located on Prima 3 in the Prima system. This we saw in the direct, which seems to be sort of like a gauntlet type challenge, maybe a casino, some side quest things happening here. Not exactly sure how deep this will go. Black Fleet is another one. Very little is known about this faction other than we see a shot of their ships on a TV screen in the direct, and it's been a rumored faction before. My guess here is that maybe this is like an antagonist to the Crimson Fleet, like potentially say you join the Crimson Fleet to help them fight the Black Fleet, something like that. But they're not just like generic spacers or pirates, because we have seen enemies just labeled, spacers or pirates. just like the eclectic mercenaries, which we have seen. So they're not just like generic enemies. So there has to be a reason that these have like a faction name, whether they're a minor or a major faction, or they link to some storyline we don't know yet. Something else that I noticed as well is in the ship customization, when you are mucking around there, you'll see like Deimos listed on ships, as well as like the Deimos ship station. So this is maybe some sort of maybe not a faction necessarily, but some sort of like corporation labeling, which, you know, corporations sell things. So there's probably going to be plenty of these, but I just thought it was worth pointing out here. So Will, Shannon, Mil, Pagliarulo jumped into the Constellation Discord to give us an answer to 16 different questions. Now, none of these questions are really groundbreaking, but there is a lot of really interesting tidbits and information about the game that I think is definitely well worth covering. So I'm not going to read all of their answers word for word, because there is just a lot of information in there. We'll get bogged down in just reading stuff, which you can go and do yourself, but we'll bring out the highlights. We'll talk about each question, and we'll just sort of cover things in general. So firstly, we'll start with question 1, which was, can you buy houses or properties in the main cities? Both Emil and Will respond with yes, but Emil's answer is a little bit more interesting in that he says you can purchase a dwelling in all the major cities in the game, and there is at least one that is specifically for completing ... something. So assumedly some sort of like quest reward, or, you know, maybe completing a faction quest, you get like a, you know, a penthouse suite in some sort of a town, maybe in Neon or something. Like, that's just speculation, but something like that. When you complete like a major quest line, I suspect you'll probably get a house or an apartment or something like that. Question 2, if we get the kid stuff trait, will our parents be generated based on our character's looks, or will there be standard parents put in place? Reading Emil's answer, yes, totally. Just as we did with Fallout 3 with your dad and Fallout 4 with your son, in Starfield, if you take the kid stuff trait, your parents are based off of you. No spoilers, but I think fans will really appreciate the actors we got to play those roles, and they just get so into it. It's awesome. While we haven't seen too much about the kid stuff sort of trait, other than just the fact that it exists, that does make me more interested in picking up kid stuff. Like, I wasn't super interested in having to give money to some NPCs when, you know, money's valuable and I like money myself.
Hello, I like money.
You know, I am interested to see what they actually look like depending on my look, and also who those voice actors are. If they're teasing that they're someone important, I'm curious to know who those are. Question 3 was a long one about if Starfield is okay to play as your first BGS game, but the main point here is how deep is the character's backstory. Will says that there is a trait and background system that will let you specify more about yourself, but you can also select an anonymous background and no traits if you want. And Emil says that as far as going into a character's backstory, that's entirely up to you, and it's all about the headcanon. So very similar, I guess, to every other BGS game, in that you are playing an existing character in the world. Like, you're already an adult. Like, you know, you remember how you get captured at the start of Skyrim, or, you know, you've got a kid at the start of Fallout 4, that sort of a thing. But you are very impressionable in that the character is sort of like a blank slate, except for those couple of elements. And it seems like Starfield would be exactly the same, in that you'll boot up the game and you'll start the game in the same place as everyone else. You'll have like that one or two like generic things that are unique to your character that sort of pushes you into the world, and everything else around that is what you impress onto your character themselves. Question 4 is, how will the smuggling cargo system work? Can we hide it somewhere on the ship and sell it for more currency later? Will says that certain items are considered contraband and you'll need to smuggle them past security ships that are in orbit of major settlements. And Emil says that there are specific items that are considered contraband, meaning they are pretty much illegal everywhere. And yes, you can hide them using special ship modules you can purchase. So, you know, don't get caught with those harvested organs. So that's interesting that it seems like we can transport organs around. But I think the main thing here is we speculated in our ship breakdown video about how there's shielded capacity, like in your shielded cargo. So assumedly that's how this does work, right? So there is going to be smuggling. You will be able to sneak contraband past security checkpoints. Assumedly that shielded cargo is potentially how you do that based on the comments here. Moving on to question 5. Will there be a jail system if we commit crimes? And Will and Emil both say yes, you can elect to go to jail or pay a fine when you are arrested, and even resist arrest and try to escape. So similar to Skyrim's system, as Emil points out, but as Starfield is more civilized, there's a government, there's laws, and obviously crimes and punishment for those things. Number 6, will time pass when not in the game? For example, my trade routes, outposts, and mining operations continue to produce, or does it only occur when actively playing? And the answer here is just when actively playing. And that sort of makes sense. Like, you know, it's obviously for a sim aspect, it's maybe not as exciting, but if you think about the fact that if you're not playing the game and you're still just like generating income from like your trade routes and stuff, then you open the game and you've got like a gazillion dollars, that's maybe not like good for the economy of the game, right? Because it just gives you access to everything. Question 7 7, can you be a double agent in the game? For example, if you join the United Colonies, can you also join the Crimson Fleet and give the United Colonies information? What factions have that feature if they do? Now, interestingly, they sort of answered this indirectly like ages ago in one of the Starfield like sort of dev videos they did, but essentially they give us a bit more information on that here. So all playable factions can be completed independently. Emil says that the infiltration, double agent stuff is exactly what you can do with the Crimson Fleet and the United Colonies. So essentially what happens here is in the Crimson Fleet storyline, it does feature the option to be an undercover agent inside the fleet on behalf of the United Colonies SysDef, which is a specific military branch of the United Colonies. I think it was Emil who actually mentioned this in one of those dead videos about how you can do this specifically with the Crimson Fleet. So even though the playable factions can be completed independently, they do seem to interact in that way. And I fully expect that either United Colonies is going to interact with the Freestar Collective because of their history, same as how Freestar Collective interacted with them, that sort of thing, but you can complete them independently. You don't have to do that. So it seems like it's potentially like diverging paths, but again, we'll have to wait and see specifically once we have played the game. Question 8 is quite an interesting one. Will you be able to play the game in a pacifist mode without killing anyone or even potentially anything? Now, they essentially the answer here, like across their responses, is just generally no. Like Will says, you can't guarantee every mission can be completed in a pacifist way, but we do have a couple of systems that will help. The main thing that comes out of this comment here is that speech challenge system, which we have seen slightly throughout the direct, but essentially Will does say here that you can use the speech challenge system to persuade someone to do something like not fighting you, that sort of a thing. And Emil also mentions that there is non-lethal weapons in the game, so essentially you could use some of those speech challenge tactics and those non-lethal weapons, but they can't guarantee that you can complete it entirely without actually killing anyone. And it does sort of make sense, I guess, like, you know, if you think about just like hostile creatures and stuff in the world, right? You're gonna have to sort of take them out, like if they're coming towards you, or even in some storylines, maybe like there's just like requirements to it. But I'd love to see someone like push that envelope and see how far they can go without actually killing anyone. Question 9: what are the beliefs and basic histories of the religions we can join? The Sanctum Universum, Enlightened, and the Great Serpent. I love this question, right? So Emil does point out that the IRL religions, so the ones we have in our world today, are actually in the game, which is really surprising and interesting to me because most games sort of steer clear of that stuff. But when talking about the religions based on the game itself, the Sanctum Universum is a couple of decades old in our timeline, but has gained a lot of prominence. They believe that God is out there somewhere in the universe and that humanity's ability to travel the stars brings us closer to God. The Enlightened, however, are an atheist group that focuses on humanitarian and community work. They believe that life is something every person has to take responsibility for, so that if they want the world to be a better place, we have to do it ourselves. Really interesting. I am curious to know what that means. And Emil also points out that they practice what they preach through various community outreach programs. Now, House Varun, the Great Serpent, this one is super cool. So Emil says that the gossip among the guards is this: a colony ship sets off for a new world, making grab jumps along the way. After one of the grab jumps, one of the passengers claimed to have spent their time communing with a celestial entity known as the Great Serpent. What was a few seconds for everyone else was much longer for him, and it brought back a mandate, which is basically get on board or be devoured when the Great Serpent encircles the universe. Is it true? I ain't saying. So in the game, you sometimes face off against House Varun Zealots as an enemy group, and that's their motivation. I recently got the House Varun logo tattooed on my wrist, so yeah, I dig them. They sound really cool, and we've seen heaps of their robots and just like their zealots in the direct as well. Like they did sort of present that sort of front and center for us, and obviously being one of the traits that we can join, assumedly we can learn more about that. And if the Great Serpent is real, like is there going to be like a world serpent that's going to consume the world? Very Norse-esque to me, like with the world serpent, you know, circulating the world, that sort of a thing. Really like that. Really like that religion. All right. Question 10. How many companions total will we be able to recruit? And both Will and Emil say that there is 20 total, but the main focus is on the Constellation companions. So 4 of them are from Constellation and have the most story interaction with the player, but all of the named characters have their own backgrounds and can follow you around, e.g. carry your burdens. We'll give some more context about how companions are really important in their games, and you know, they're always things that people gravitate towards. Like, you know, Piper always comes to mind for me for Fallout 4. I found her to be really interesting, but in all Bethesda Game Studios games, the companions stand out. There's always like one favorite. I'm curious to know what yours is in the comments, guys. Let me know across all the Bethesda games what your favorite companion is. Question 11. When we assign crew members to work on outposts, do we have to pay pay them salaries? Yes, you will, but only once. So they mention here about how the economy may have got a bit complicated if you had to pay them regular salaries, but there is an upfront cost. But interestingly as well, you can use that speech challenge game to negotiate over that actual one-time payment, like how much you have to pay them, which I think is really interesting, and apparently traits can affect that as well. Question 12, will our companions be able to level up their perks? Will their perks stack with ours? So all crew start with a set of skills at specific ranks, but they don't level up, but will come with these skills at different ranks depending on the companion. The companion skills are a mix of like role-playing flavor, but also will stack with your own skills. So you might meet a character that's especially good at rifles, and you can hire them to watch your back, or you might meet an astrodynamics expert that will increase your grav drive range when assigned to your ship. So I guess a good example here, right, is using Barrett. He has Starship Engineering, Particle Beam Weapon Systems, and Robotics, and Gastronomy. So Starship Engineering and Particle Beam Weapon Systems obviously will help with your ship's like abilities, whatever those specific skills are. Robotics is increasing your damage against robot type enemies, but Gastronomy is like the chef skill. So assumedly that's sort of flavor. Like I don't know if Barrett will be cooking meals for us, but it seems like that's what they're sort of referring to with some of these that are maybe like flavor, you know, they don't actually do anything, like they're about the characters' backgrounds and interests. 13, what are your favorite parts of the game? Emil says shipping it, which obviously I can totally agree with, but Will says that he loves finding content that I haven't seen yet or forgot about, and our games are so big that no one person is likely to have seen it all, even after all our passes and levels of review. And Emil sort of echoes that in a way, but sort of mentions that personally he's seen every quest line, every city, every major piece of content in the game at every stage of development, and for him it's the real pleasure of seeing how they've all evolved into the versions they are today and the versions everyone here will play. He has a real soft spot for Neon, which I totally agree with. I love the look of Neon. I can't wait to get there, and sort of points out about how it's a cyberpunk style sentiment. But 14 is what books or movies had a big influence on some of the quests. Will points out that he is a big history nerd and he likes podcasts like Hardcore History and the History of Rome. And Emil points out that he is into like all the old school sort of sci-fi stuff like Star Wars, OG, Battlestar Galactica, Space 1999, Buck Rangers, Battle Beyond the Stars, Ice Pirates, and let's not forget about the classic that is Metal Storm, The Destruction of Jared Zinn. I've heard of like 2 of these things, I'll be honest. Like I'm not super read on sci-fi lore, but obviously I've heard of Star Wars, guys. Like that's definitely one that I've heard of, right?
Live long and prosper.
But you know, he also mentioned some modern day things like some of the writings from Arthur C. Clarke and Robert Heinlein, as well as films like Contact, Interstellar, 2001: A Space Odyssey, and Event Horizon. But I'm really interested in those Easter eggs that are going to be in the game. Like I can't wait to come across Easter eggs from like sci-fi stuff that we know. God, I hope there is a Firefly Easter egg in this game. I am going to be hunting that down like you wouldn't believe. All right, moving on to question 15. What are some favorite small details in Starfield that add to the immersion? Emil says that although humans are living in space and our aesthetics is very much NASA punk, it feels like a very lived in universe, and you can see that everywhere. Will points out that he loves the outfits, and you can see the seams and materials, especially on the spacesuits. And then Emil mentions that how everyone may love sandwiches, but there are books lying around and the notes on the bulletin boards, the environmental storytelling that our level designers and world artists are so good at, and also they both mention buttons. Books is the big pull out here, I think, right? So in the Elder Scrolls games, you obviously have tons of books that you can read, and they're very interesting, some of them. And in Fallout, it's like the computers, you know, there's all that information on the computers that you can find. So that history of telling stories through things you can find in the world, and that environmental storytelling is definitely going to be here, which is fantastic. Like it's some of the best content in Fallout games, especially Fallout 4. There's a tons of locations that, you know, you come into them and they're just like there's just enemies in there, but the story is actually told through the terminals that are in the game and just like where the characters are in the world and stuff. I really like that stuff in Fallout and Skyrim. So glad to see that that's still here for Starfield. Now, the last question is, what is the history of the mechs? And Emil says that the mechs is a good one. So we showed that this is a bit through the animated shorts. The mechs are leftovers from the Colony War being singular. Both sides, United Colonies and Freestar Collective, had mechs, but the Freestar Collective really mastered them. The United Colonies had mechs too, but they also relied on the controlled alien beasts from their Xeno Warfare division. Think about that skill that we can get in the game, just wanted to point that out. Both of those were outlawed with the armistice that ended the Colony War. I'm not saying that there is an old mech battleground in the game, I'm typing it. Mechs, not usable, no, they are in ruins. So those animated shorts are fantastic, by the way, and we definitely did see this in one of those animated shorts. And so it's good to get that sort of call out here that this is from the Colony War, which is where the mechs were from. There's not too much to grab out of this question here. It's more just like lore flavor. And speaking of lore, the official timeline was dropped on the Starfield website. So basically starting from as close to today as you can, from 2050, they detail what happened and how we got from, let's say, today's world to 2330, which is when Starfield begins, and how the colonies were made and the different wars. There was actually 2 wars, which is, I think, an interesting thing to point out. But if you want to read that, I'll leave a link to that in the comments down below. But thank you guys for watching this video till the end. Let me know your hype levels for Starfield. We are like 2 weeks away. Thank you to the members for supporting the channel. You guys are real ones. My name is Norza, and I hope you have a great day.